This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hello, this is Kent Kelly, CFO of Uninet, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 928.
So I've got a FP&A specialist focused on marketing, another one focused on development and real estate, another one focused on operations, right? And then core kind of corporate FP&A. Because I don't have a strategy team, the way my philosophy is, I need to hire the best available athletes. They will have a major, right? That's the kind of function they face off against. And they will have a minor, which is whatever kind of strategic work that we have going on. So they have to be smart, flexible. And then I love telling this to people. I said, look, for a business our size, to punch above our weight, we have to be better than the next guy at analytics and data. And fortunately, there's excellent solutions out there now that are cloud-based. And 10 years ago, we never would have had access to that kind of firepower.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Steve Cirulis, CFO of Potbelly Sandwich Works. If not for the changing dietary habits of Americans and the surprise arrival of a global pandemic, it's perhaps fair to speculate that Steven Cirulis would likely not be occupying the CFO office at Potbelly Sandwich Shops today. Turn back the clock only a few years, and Steven Cirulis found himself being routinely engaged by venture capitalists interested in picking his brain about the world of alternative proteins. Having held a succession of top strategy roles with the likes of McDonald's and Panera, it seems Cirulis understood the mathematics behind the evolving menus of the fast dining industry. Fast forward to 2019, when Cirulis tells us he decided to put some of his VC-related activities aside to accommodate an advisory gig with a publicly held sandwich shop, Potbelly. However, as the pandemic arrived and restaurant doors closed, Cirulis received a job offer he would not turn down. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time, so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack, so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. Hello, we're speaking with Steven Cirulis, CFO of Potbelly. Steve, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jack.
So, Steve, as always, we're going to ask you to look back and identify some of those experiences you feel prepared you for a finance leadership role. What would you share with us?
First, I'd share I did not expect to be in a CFO seat for a public company when I was thinking about my career. In fact, I was actually hoping I would be in some sort of sports management role. I kind of went down the path. I had applied for an internship at CBS Sports for an Olympic intern role, which I got but turned down. I think I got a little cold feet. I worked for the Arena Football League at one point, if you remember what that was, as kind of a marketing and PR intern. And then all throughout college, I worked for the Chicago Bears. So I thought I was on this path, right? And then once you see what your paycheck looks like and you look at what your student debt looks like, you're like, oh, well, that's probably not going to make it all work for me. So I started looking at things like the law, but I didn't have any family friends who were lawyers, no family members who were lawyers. So before I took the plunge and spent a lot more money coming out of college and 3 years of my life, I decided, let me dip my foot in that pool. So I went into litigation consulting, and it was great for me because I had a chance to use my economics degree and really cut my teeth in modeling everything from damage calculations to monopoly concentration, and really learn the ins and outs of Excel. But then and then that's kind of got me on the path of I really like this idea of trying to use numbers to prove a case, and you can really be compelling in that way. So I ended up going to business school, and then after that went out to San Francisco, and this was in the Web 1.0 days, right? So think 1999, 2000, where San Francisco was really kind of the center of the universe. And so I took a job with a consulting firm called Profit, which really was focused on generating demand, really somewhat marketing focused, but really a lot of work with startups, helping them, and VCs, helping them hone their business models. And how do you get big fast, right? How do you drive demand? How do you grow, right? Really focused on growth. And then also big lumbering, they would call them terrestrial companies in the day. How do you figure out this thing called e-commerce and the internet? So it was a great, really exciting sort of time for me, and I that's where I really began my strategy career. My background really weighs heavy in strategy. So I spent some time there, about 7 or 8 years, and then like most consultants, at some point you have you face the decision. Do I want to be a consultant or should I do something different? I decided with a wife and a child that my lifestyle would be better with a slightly different speed. So I ended up going to Gap and led strategy for the Gap brand for some time. And if I spent time at Profit really working kind of the top of the P&L, pushing growth and demand, well, I got a baptism in the middle of the P&L at Gap, really trying to understand how to make that business profitable again, right? This wasn't about making Gap, the icon that it once was, or the Apple store of the mall. Again, it was really, how do you make this business contribute to the overall value creation of the company? And so that meant getting into inventory management, getting into thinking hard about G&A, thinking hard about pricing, and so that was a great lesson for me in terms of my finance career to really get focused on different parts of the P&L, and then I got pulled into restaurants by taking a job at McDonald's, and if I thought Gap was big, right, at about $7 billion when I was there and 3,000 stores. Think about going from there to about 90 billion in terms of top line sales at McDonald's, and so my role there was within the corporate strategy kind of realm, was not to help make a business necessarily more profitable or figure out should there be a new sandwich in Singapore or anything like that, but it was how do you move the stock price of a $90 billion company, right? So. It was really, if I went from top of the P&L to the middle of the P&L to now really the balance sheet, and how do you really build equity for a company? And so, and I caught the bug, right, with restaurants in that business. It's one of those things where it's always dynamic, super competitive, and what's more fun really than kind of sharing a meal with someone. So that was great. And then I had a good run at McDonald's, but then decided, I really want to get more operating experience and move from more pure strategy into operating. And so I had an opportunity at Panera to work what they would call the convenience channels, so mobile order and pay and drive-through, and had some P&L responsibility there, as well as some strategy work. What's interesting about that experience from a finance perspective was the day after I started, I'm in training in Virginia. My phone starts buzzing. I pick it up, text after text after text. Panera got sold to JAB, a private equity firm. Literally the day after I had started. And so, what was great about that was the uncertainty wasn't great, but what was great about that was really understanding and seeing firsthand how a private equity firm really operates a business, right? And so, things like expanding working capital and the value that creates, right, was an incredible lesson for me in my finance journey. And after Panera, I did a little bit of work in corporate venture capital when I was at McDonald's and did some advising for some VCs and some companies like Google as they were exploring alternative proteins and ag tech and food tech and those kinds of things. And then ended up doing a little bit of advisory work for Potbelly in late 2019, early 2020, and they were looking for a CFO at the time, but I was really kind of enjoying what I was doing on the venture capital side of things. And lo and behold, they had not yet hired a CFO when COVID hit. So I was ostensibly the person they turned to immediately. Okay, what do we do here? So I'm the guy who's helping preserve cash. I'm the guy who's renegotiating bank covenants. Working with the management team to, unfortunately, work on pay cuts and furloughs and everything that you've probably talked to a lot of your podcast guests about. And then a couple of weeks into that experience, was asked if I would consider being the permanent CFO, and so I jumped at it. For a number of reasons, and we can get into the business a bit, but it was, some people think you're crazy. Why would you jump into a restaurant company at the beginning of a pandemic? But Potbelly is a special brand, and with a lot of upside and potential, and I had seen how to do this, and I could certainly apply my strategy background to a business where I could really make a difference.
Wow. Well, that's a very nice overview for us. Thank you for that. It sounded like the profit chapter was one of the more defining chapters of your career because it not only brought you into the strategy realm, but it really made you someone who likes to address company challenges and problems. How am I doing? Am I close or?
That's absolutely correct. I got a big thrill out of solving complex problems, right? And working with different companies facing different challenges. So consulting for me at that time was absolutely the perfect thing to get into.
Now I'm curious as to, like at McDonald's, perhaps, the types of meetings you would be sitting across the table from the CFO or senior members of the finance team. Can you give us a sense of how strategy fit into that world? I mean, were you rarely included? Did you find yourself? It depends. There were certain initiatives that got underway and you were included all the time, others not so much. I don't know. Give us a sense of how that strategy component was integrated into the finance discussion.
Sure. Well, I think an enterprise that's that big, right, has and is that mature, has largely worked through a lot of the kind of standard elements of a growth playbook, right? Expanding units, and expanding day parts, and doing the things that are natural earlier in an evolution of a business. And so when you get as big as McDonald's, and all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second. Then you start to think about the business model itself, right? How does this company make money, and how can we create more value for shareholders? Using the base business kind of as a way to do that. So, like I said, my work at McDonald's was really transfixed on trying to come up with things that could work at scale, right? Leveraging the scale of McDonald's in a way that no one else could match, right? So as an example, one of the things I worked on when I was there, McDonald's went through a point where they refranchised many of their shops, sold off China, right? That was a way to unlock value where instead of putting their own capital at play, they would, put the capital of their franchisees at play, right? Create better, more predictable cash flows by being more franchised. They were 20% company owned when I got there. When I left, they're about 5% company owned. Similarly, this was in the early days of call it mobile order and pay, and kind of really the mobile phone was kind of coming into the fore. Delivery was one of those business models that had not been tested in Western Europe nor in the United States. And so one of my jobs was to figure out, okay, how can McDonald's make money at delivery? So that was and that's something you would put everywhere, right? So for me, it was really working arm in arm with the C-suite, really the office of the CFO a lot, to try to say, okay, here are some potential future states, some potential business models, and here's honestly the value that they can unlock. And then, like any good CFO, right, they start to allocate capital to the things that they think are going to be most accretive.
Along the way, did your path intersect with the investor relations folks as well?
Not a lot at McDonald's. I would certainly be a part of the early conversations around what's the story for the quarter and how do we think about, portraying, the path forward for the business. But I wasn't as deeply involved in, follow-ups with the investors or the analysts, but was part of that team that would help create the path for whatever that conversation needed to be. Again, you can imagine, McDonald's fairly sophisticated beast as it relates to those kinds of things. A lot of exposure, obviously, at Potbelly with that.
Just looking back in time, again, you talked about Gap, but then it's McDonald's and Panera and, of course, Potbelly. Why, what is it about restaurants then? What is it that's excited you, or, you found a home here for an extended period? Why is that?
Yeah, well, there's how much time do we have, Jack? Like, there's so many things. First of all, a couple things. One, it's everybody can relate to it, right? Everybody eats. Everybody has an opinion about it. Some people love things. They don't love things, but it's also something that people do every day, multiple times a day. And for me, it's an element of fun, right? It's an element of connection, and being a part of that and helping build brands and create value there is exciting to me. What makes it even more exciting, though, is, it is highly competitive. And being someone who comes from a strategy background, there's always going to be challenges, right? It is, you don't really have competitors. That's similar in apparel that dominate the marketplace. McDonald's probably comes the closest, but even with McDonald's, there's a lot of competitors out there that are innovating and doing interesting things and creating value on their own. And so for me, that's another part of it. Also, what's fun with restaurants is you can make change pretty quickly, right? Each of these restaurants is their own little factory, right? And the amount of change and impact you can have in a short period of time is pretty substantial, versus like being in a big company that has more of a manufacturing bent, where you're going to have to take years to really kind of see some of the improvements. So speed to impact is another big part of it for me. And having been in restaurants now for well over a decade, you get to build instincts around it. What doesn't look right, where there are opportunities, and now being in the CFO seat and having had the strategy background, boy, it's really fun to be where I'm at and work with the management team that I'm working with, because there's so many great things that we can do. We're just limited by time and ultimately resources to make them happen.
Well, we probably have a few more career-related questions for you, but right now let's ask you about Potbelly. What's special about Potbelly? What's this company do? Many of us know it, I imagine, but tell us about this company.
Yeah, well, listen, the origin story is really kind of fun. It started in 1977, really out of an antique shop in the north side of Chicago. And a guy by the name of Peter Hastings probably realized that I can't really move antiques quickly, but I can maybe satisfy my guests by serving them some sandwiches, right? And that's what he did. And I think what ended up happening was he started selling more sandwiches than he did antiques. And that shop on Lincoln Avenue here in Chicago is still open. And there was a gentleman by the name of Bryant Kyle who came along in the 90s, and he saw the potential in this great brand. And he's really kind of, you call it, he's like the Ray Kroc in some ways of Potbelly, where he took the business and built it into the multi-hundred unit business from coast to coast that it really is today. So now, we're at 372 shops. Most of those are company owned. We're about 90% company owned right now. But what really makes Potbelly interesting and different is it focuses on hot sandwiches, right? Sandwiches are one of those categories where the barriers to entry are not great, right? It's not hard to make a sandwich. It is hard to make, I think, a sandwich that people love and come back for and is beloved. And we toast our sandwiches, every single one of them. We don't offer cold sandwiches. We also serve these sandwiches with a verve and a style and a kind of a service model, which we refer to as delivering good vibes, right? And if you go into one of our shops, it kind of feels a little bit like an antique shop, but very unique to the environment and city that you're in. Feels very much like a neighborhood sandwich shop. So we take that seriously. It's a big differentiator for us. There's a lot of sandwich shops where you might want to pick it up and go, right? But at Potbelly, it's a destination where people will spend time with their friends, or sometimes go on a date, or even do a little work. But for us, you add up our hot sandwiches, our unbelievable desserts. We bake our cookies every day, and I challenge you to find a better cookie. They're baked fresh every day in the shops. We have hand dipped milkshakes, which are also fantastic. And so we occupy, I think, this unique space in fast casual where it's a destination and people crave our food. And I've worked at McDonald's, I've worked at Panera, I've worked at Gap, and Potbelly is the only place where people universally will say, once they find out I work there, something nice about it, something great. Oh, I love this sandwich, or I've been to the first shop, right? And with McDonald's, would hear that too, but sometimes people just remain silent. So Potbelly, I think, is a really unique brand that has massive potential. I mentioned it was a pretty easy decision to join even in a pandemic. Potbelly has shops from coast to coast, right? Shops in Portland and Seattle, shops in Boston and New York, as far north as Minneapolis, as far south, as San Antonio and pushing into Florida. So it's hard sometimes for a brand that sometimes has regional roots to really expand outward. Lots of fits and starts. I mean, even Dunkin', spent a lot of time in the Northeast before it eventually got momentum and moved west. That's one of the huge advantages of Potbelly is, we're in 12 plus airports. People know Potbelly, and that's where the big opportunity is for us, is to really expand this brand and bring it to more people, because it is one of those places where people kind of smile when they hear the name.
And again, the company went public nearly 10 years ago, and you arrive in 2020. They've hired a CFO with a strong strategy background. So it seems to me like they're ready for a new chapter. They have big ideas. The pandemic arrives, might have slowed down a lot of ideas from coming to fruition. But at the same time, what is the chapter that, this strategy-minded CFO has been brought into the mix for? Imagine it's growing that brand, but what is the next chapter for this company?
Yeah. Well, as I was explaining, the brand is really the fulcrum of how this business gets moving again. And I think it was struggling, frankly, before I took the role, right? Same-store sales were down, traffic was down, margins were down, and the stock was down. And so it was kind of a tough performance environment to jump into. So again, one of the things that I think makes restaurants great is, particularly Potbelly, it's not complicated. It makes sandwiches. Potbelly doesn't really serve breakfast except in a few places. It doesn't have late nights. It doesn't have multiple versions of itself. So there's a pretty straightforward approach to first fixing the four walls, right? Making the economics work, making sure that the food costs are in line, making sure we can tune labor, and we've done a nice job with all of that, so that you start to create margin expansion at the unit level. And then once you do that, it becomes a task of how do you replicate that model? So and how do you actually expand the business? And so for me, I was paired up with a wonderful CEO, Bob Wright, who he had a deep restaurant background at Wendy's as former COO. And when we got together, we really said, hey, look, we're going to get through this COVID thing, right? We know we will. So then what comes next, ultimately? And you line up all the things that we just discussed, like, okay, we've got a great brand. We're coast to coast. The brand had no debt, frankly, going into COVID, right? Which made, even the balance sheet was pretty healthy. Just needed, I think, a little bit of extra kind of restaurant magic, right, from folks who had done it before. And what was really clear was, hey, look, the IPO was 10 years ago. That equity had already been spent on building these shops from coast to coast. This is a brand that wasn't likely to raise a lot of capital to go build their own shops. And so the pivot point was to say, look, let's flip this business model and make it a franchise model, right? This is the way that we're going to create shareholder value, is to really have an asset-light, capital-light way of growing. Bob has deep franchise experience. I have it in my background with McDonald's and Panera, and so a bit of a challenging pivot for a business model. But nevertheless, I'd seen how it works. Bob had seen how it works, and having my strategy background to help define it, to help model it, to help our board understand it, to help our investors understand it, and then help activate it was really the task, and really we're still within that sort of making that change happen, and it's working quite well so far.
What was the actual finance architecture that you inherited, the finance function? Did it have the systems and processes you needed to get that visibility so you can design that new model and experiment? I mean, did you have that? Was there certain housekeeping things that had to get done?
Let me put it this way. The resource level at Potbelly was very much more like a startup than it was like a Panera or a McDonald's or a Gap, right, from a finance perspective. I credit my controller when I first joined. I'm not a CPA, right? So coming in as a CFO of a public company, really need to trust your controller, and I have an excellent one. And so that was helpful for me, because that allowed me to spend some time really focusing on how do we help this business survive COVID, but also what needs to be done to really build the team. Almost no FP&A team when I joined. A couple of folks who were working hard, but not at all the level of depth that we needed and skill set that we needed. So I went about architecting what we're almost through building today, right? Which is a really strong accounting and control side of the house, and then a really strong FP&A side of the house. I also hold the title of Chief Strategy Officer, but I don't have a budget to go build a strategy team. So the way I've structured my FP&A team is I've got people who are specialists to support our function. So I've got FP&A specialists focused on marketing, another one focused on development and real estate, another one focused on operations, right, and then core kind of corporate FP&A. Because I don't have a strategy team, the way my philosophy is, I need to hire the best available athletes. They will have a major, right? That's the kind of function they face off against. And they will have a minor, which is whatever kind of strategic work that we have going on. So they have to be smart, flexible. And then I love telling this to people. I said, look, for a business our size, to punch above our weight, we have to be better than the next guy at analytics and data. And fortunately, there's excellent solutions out there now that are cloud-based. And 10 years ago, we never would have had access to that kind of firepower. And I'm also a big believer in statistical analysis and applying that to finance, right? And so I've got a team that's able to work both sides of those things in order to really, I think, extract and identify opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to find. So we're still scrappy, we're still lean, but we're running on all cylinders now, which is really exciting.
Are there be interested to learn about certain metrics that you have brought greater exposure to or have sought to educate the greater organization about, or maybe a particular part of the organization about? Let's start watching this daily, weekly, whatever. Is there a business dynamic that you're trying to reveal more openly across the organization?
I smile only because this has become my quest, right? Recently with the team as we've kind of transitioned into this work against a new business model, which is the importance of return on invested capital, right? ROIC. It is truly the kind of shorthand to value creation, and it doesn't get measured or monitored all that often with management teams. Some do, right? But what it to me, it's the intersection of finance and strategy, right? It allows you to take a look at all the opportunities that you're faced with, or the challenges that you're faced with, and if using your best efforts, try to understand, okay, what is this going to do for our business, and what kind of returns is it going to provide for our investment? You stack that up against your cost of capital, and if it's value accretive, the decisions then become easy. But unless you introduce this idea of return on invested capital, it becomes really hard to prioritize, because then it becomes someone's, there might be a popular project or an exciting project, but ultimately it might not actually create value. It's a great way and I'm teaching our management team to think that way. We just had a week-long strategic offsite last week where I continue to kind of use this as a shorthand for how we're going to build the business going forward. So it's not always intuitive, but I think the best management teams are the ones that are able to live it and make decisions based on it.
And again, what you just shared about the management team and the type of discussion you're having with them, probably they haven't had that at Potbelly before, where you're beginning a conversation about capital allocation and how important it is to understand the returns. If you're going to ask for more, we need to, reveal it more.
No, I've done strategic planning work, obviously, many different times in my career. Did it for McDonald's globally and so forth. And what I've tried to bring to Potbelly really is an annual process which focuses on multiple horizons. So I get together with our CEO and our chairman, and that's where early in the year, so first quarter of the year, and we talk about those long range potential ideas, like 5 years, 10 years from now, what do we want this business to become, and what are the kinds of things we need to start thinking about now in order to make that reality happen, and dismiss some things too, right? Things that could become distractions or things that we're just not ready for right now, and align on what we're going to pursue or may not pursue in that long-term horizon. And we come out of that meeting with a few really specific kind of focus areas for the business and here's where I think we're going to create value. We align on those. Then I narrow the time window a bit, and we meet then as a management team, our senior leadership team, and we talk about those priorities and what are some of the things we can do to breathe life into those and capture those opportunities. It's a little more free form. It's a little more kind of idea generating. We do that in the second quarter. And then coming out of there, we have a long list of things which we might activate. And then between, let's call it May and the end of August, which is what we just did, the management team is then to go build business cases around those ideas. Again, showing me how much these opportunities are going to return, right? What's the investment? What's the top line, and or what's the savings? And then we spend time, like we did last week, sharpening and further, honing those ideas such that coming out of there, we now know pretty closely what our budget's going to look like next year. We know how much we're going to have to focus on with G&A, with CapEx, and we know roughly what our top line will be. So we start broad and long term, and by the time we get to this point of the year where it's really kind of budget heavy, we've got a head start on what we're going to do to drive value within the next 12, 24 months, which makes it really easy then for me to go to the board and communicate that, eventually easy to go to investors and communicate that. So wasn't just one meeting last week. It's a culmination of strategic thinking that goes on throughout the year. The strategy doesn't wait for the calendar to turn. It happens all the time.
Okay, one last question regarding to this finance function. You're speaking of meetings, your FP&A minded executives are in a conference room down the hall, and you swing open the door. What are they thinking you're going to ask them for?
They know I'm going to ask them about the initiatives that they're working on and what they're going to return. We talked about that, right?
Can we get a little more specific? Yeah.
Yeah. No, listen, it depends on who it is, right? So if I barge into the ops leader's office, we would have a conversation about input costs and labor, right? I have a job, I think, as the CFO and CSO, right, of this company to understand what's happening in the environment externally. Recently, I'm sure a lot of your CFOs have talked to you about inflation and how do we manage that. And so with my operating partner, I'm going to ask, hey, where do we see commodity prices going? How much of our basket is locked? How are we thinking about wage inflation and how should I think about that as it relates to price increases, right? So it's a really focused kind of back and forth things related to the middle of the P&L, right? If I were to go into the marketing, our CMO's office, because I have some background, right, in brand and marketing, I'm either his greatest ally or his greatest challenger, right? Because I can kind of speak the language. But for me, marketing investments are critical. We're a business that typically has underinvested in marketing. In this business, usually 4 to 5% of sales goes toward marketing. When I joined, it was under 1%. And so my goal ultimately is to get us to a point where we're investing every dollar in a way that returns 3, 4x what we're putting into it. And that really goes back to kind of my really heavy bent into data. I sort of have a reputation in the company as the test and learn guy, right? So I want to make sure, particularly if we're going to invest capital, that we have a robust test and learn process for all of these initiatives, right? And that's where this advanced analytics comes in. We have some partners that help us with that, but it is again another one of those intersections between strategy and finance, right? Let's make smart decisions, but let's not make big mistakes. Those things can add as much value to one another.
I just want to ask you some AI related questions. It would seem many finance leaders have begun to more closely examine how their organizations are leveraging AI and whether there are areas they might be lagging in terms of costs and time savings, as well as other strategic benefits. Has your team undergone an AI reality check recently?
Yeah, it came up in our strategy session. It comes up even in our weekly meetings. And I think the way I'm viewing it right now is there's sort of two branches, right? There's the generative AI piece, which has, I think, more application to perhaps things like marketing and others where you can really kind of leverage the massive opus of information that gets thrown into those engines. And when we haven't picked a path yet. As it relates to that, because I think, and appropriately so, there's security concerns and those kinds of things as it relates to providing information into those engines. So more to come there. I think we'll eventually get to a point where we feel like it'll be helpful in that way. Potbelly is not one of the largest companies, so it's great to actually watch and see how others test this out, right? Whether it be drive-through generative AI kind of bots or those kinds of things. We watch that really closely. I watch that really closely, in my seat. As it relates to finance specifically, I'm a big proponent. I talked to you about sort of test and learn and the advanced analytics there. We leverage Power BI quite a bit. Not a lot of AI there. There's a little bit, but what I'm hoping to do, what my goal is to do here is finance has historically been a reporting based kind of function, right? We'll tell you what happened and we'll do it with accuracy and we'll do it with timeliness. But more and more, and particularly given my background in strategy, finance needs to be forward looking, right? Tell us what the risks are, tell us what the opportunities are, tell us where we think things are going. And in order to do that, it's a lot of the sort of mundane reporting tasks can be, I think, assisted greatly with AI. And then similarly, and we've got some of our cloud-based platforms have AI components for forecasting, right? And those are the kinds of things that we're going to start to take more advantage of, because, like I said, I believe that this business can punch above its weight by leveraging data and some of those things in a much more robust way.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're going to jump to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask you just to share one moment of finance insight that you experienced along the way. It led you to pursue an opportunity, or maybe you were going to avoid a risk, whatever it may have been. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Sure. Well, there's probably quite a few I could pull from, and some I may have mentioned earlier, but one that is quite indelible relates to the pandemic. You can imagine when you shut down all of your restaurants for a period of time and then open only some of them up for takeout. The abrupt downshift in revenue really kind of rattles you quite a bit. And ours was a business that went and applied for and received a PPP loan, like many others, right? And we received $10 million through that program, and it was critical that we received it, right? We were burning cash, and the real kind of strategic finance moment was cash. At least in my history, tends to be something that finance professionals will watch, but typically, unless it's a really struggling business, it doesn't get watched all that closely, right? But in the pandemic, boy, was cash the most important thing for this business. And so we became laser focused, not just on understanding it and monitoring it, right? But also forecasting it, right? And really managing it. That was a moment where now we've got a management team and a board, frankly, that is hyper focused on the importance of cash. And again, back to my ROIC conversation, the return you get on that cash. And so I'm used to working in big companies. A lot of our management team folks are used to working at big companies. And understanding and managing this flexibility between should I spend this dollar on G&A? Like, should I spend this dollar on getting a new head in this seat, or should I spend this dollar on putting a new POS system right in the restaurants? Well, if we focus on returns and we're going to spend the dollar, what's the return on that? It's a whole new world now for us as it relates to, I think, really pushing this business forward with creating value in mind. So. Getting forgiveness on that back to the PPP loan, right? Getting forgiveness on that PPP loan was another sort of wonderful day, in my career as a CFO. And thankfully now, look, that was a great bridge for us to continue to, strengthen our business, but also just an incredibly great lesson for me and the management team on what's important for us.
From episode 740, this is CFO Roy Simmons of GE Lighting, a Savant company.
The pivot that we went through in 2019 in preparation to join up with Savant was to establish ourselves in I'll call it a standalone middle market finance organization, where we had to retool and redefine treasury. We had to retool and redefine controllership and tax. We needed to hire talent into the business so that we didn't have to survive with General Electric Company transition service agreements, the nemesis of many CFOs in post-divestiture worlds. And so that year that we spent prior to the actual consummation of the sale was around building that, I'll call it standalone.
We're going to jump to our mentoring round, where I get to ask you several quick questions intended to inspire and inform future finance leaders. So you landed there, as we said, at the start of the pandemic, and we're wondering about that first 90 days and what you wish someone had told you. Again, you had these very senior strategy officer roles in very large corporations. You had been in the C-suite really and dealt with these people for many years. But this is the first time you're getting the CFO responsibilities. What is it that you wish someone had told you? Or what would you, if you could go back in time and just maybe tell yourself something, what would it have been?
At that point, get some sleep. Yeah, if the
It
day
is an
ended,
odd first 90 days, I have to
yeah,
say. You're, yeah.
if it ended in a Y, the day ended in a Y, I was working, and so it was crazy for sure. So
Yeah.
atypical, of course, but that would have been certainly one of the pieces of advice I would have given myself. I think also make the numbers intuitive as quickly as possible. Right? I think I think having a consulting background, it helps because you're jumping from one client to another and you have to understand things quickly, diagnose. But the faster you can make the numbers second nature, the faster you can look at a small change and you know what that means or you know what it could mean is absolutely critical, particularly in an environment like when I joined, in the early days of the pandemic. It was critical. Understanding margin components, understanding, is that a good day of traffic or is that a bad day of traffic, right? That makes you, number one, effective, but also makes you credible, with the rest of your management team. So that was important. Build great relationships. Now, this is interesting for us because when the pandemic hit, we went remote, just like everybody else did, or most did. And we've stayed that way. So we are primarily a remote business here. And so we do that for a number of reasons, not the least of which is, again, punching above our weight. It allows us to attract talent from all over the country. And we've benefited from that. Our CEO, he is in Columbus. I'm here in Chicago, where Potbelly was founded. Our COO is in Tampa. We've got, anywhere and everywhere you can work, as long as you're the right kind of candidate, Potbelly will welcome you. So that's helped. However, there's the challenges that you all read about and hear about in terms of building culture and collaborating. And that was really hard at the beginning of the pandemic, but it is, again, I'm sure folks have discussed this. It's an absolutely critical component of being effective. Because look, when you're at that point in time, when you're delivering bad news to someone, or you're asking them to cut their budget, or you're asking them to potentially restructure their teams, there's a human element to all of that, and having a relationship with the folks who need to make that happen is absolutely critical. And then the other thing I would say is just let your team do their jobs, right? I mentioned before that when I started, I had a great controller, and I had some good FP&A support, but perhaps not enough. I was trying to do a lot of different things at the very beginning, and my biggest value add, I think, at that time was not necessarily being the guy to do all the spreadsheets, but really step back and think, okay, how do we keep this business afloat in such a way that it slingshots out of the pandemic and like we have, into growth. So build a great team and then leverage that great team is how I would think about it.
Nice. Thank you for that. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side. We're wondering if you're known for a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you have, something that sets you apart. Does anything come to mind? What would people say about that's just how Steve's always done it? If we turn back the clock, maybe you did it then too. I don't know.
Yeah. Listen, I tend to throw some references out there, whether they be pop cultural references or references to books or current events. And so I'm the kind of guy who reads a ton. And I'm a curious person, and I think having a career in strategy kind of is a good match, right? And now leveraging that into finance. So I'm sort of known as a person who will bring some of that to the table. I also am the person, because of that, you probably want me on your Trivial Pursuit team. A broad array of interests that I sort of quench with a lot of reading and moving around. So. As an example, someone asked me the other day, what are some good books, right? Then what have you been reading lately? And one of the first ones that came to mind is this book called The Long Ships, which is it's like a Viking tale, and I really could care less about Vikings, but boy, is it a good story, right? And then you start to get into Viking things, and read a couple other books about Denmark and Sweden and how that whole thing worked, and you just sort of get lost, you get down the rabbit hole. So I do that quite a bit. I definitely do that quite a bit. And in terms of routine, I'm sure everybody you talk to says, "Oh yeah, I get up and I exercise, and that's how I start my day." And I thought, yeah, of course I do that. But what's helpful about this environment and this model we've built at Potbelly, being primarily remote, is it gives me a chance to, I get to start my day honestly with my family, which instead of like getting up early and like leaving and catching a train or getting in the car, I can hang out with my kids if they want to hang out with me. I've got 3 teenagers, so it's more them tolerating me, but it really gets me energized. And if anybody can humble you, it's a teenager. And so I start my day with a good dose of humility and a little bit of family, and it's an awesome habit that I hope to continue. Post pandemic here, it's been great.
Just given the fact you were at McDonald's for 5 years and we're touching on pop culture, the movie The Founder, which I think is an outstanding movie about business. And any thoughts? Did you see it? Did you like it?
I did see it. I did like it. I think it's a little obviously sensationalized, and I'm not so sure Ray Kroc, if he saw it, would say he liked it necessarily. But it's funny when I joined McDonald's. Just as an anecdote, I've lived in San Francisco when I accepted the offer, and so I had a giant gift basket that was sent, like I'm sure most do. But in the gift basket, in addition to some Happy Meal toys for my kids, was a book about the founding of McDonald's. And I'll tell you what, I think the movie was loosely based on this, but was fascinating about that book, kind of bringing it back to this podcast, is the ingenuity and the inventiveness of the CFO, and his name escapes me right now, to create that business model. It was remarkable, honestly, to create the model whereby McDonald's owns the land and then they build the building and they're the landlord as well as the franchise. Just it's kind of strange. It was kind of exciting, right? Most probably wouldn't get excited about those kinds of things, but it was, and you didn't get that in the movie. You would never have got that.
Yeah, no, I thought they did it very well. And that's sort of an aha moment where you're like, you're right, this guy does deserve the credit, because he wasn't necessarily the founder, but wow, he came up with a business model that
figured it out. Right.
Yeah,
and now we're all inspired, right? There's this whole idea of franchise businesses, not just in restaurants, but beyond, I think heavily influenced by what Ray Kroc did.
Yeah. So earlier, you shared with us how you worked at Profit, and I kind of resisted asking you about Scott Galloway, who was one of the founders of the firm, I believe, and someone pretty widely known today, in part because of a popular podcast called Pivot. But he's an NYU professor and just one of industry's true provocative thinkers today. Was he there when you were there?
Yes, he was. So Scott, when I was at business school at Kellogg, Scott came on campus, right? So he is everything you see or hear or listen to and more when he's in person. He is one of the most, I think, compelling, convincing, charismatic people that I've ever come across. And he sold profit on me. You're in business school and you're looking at big names and iBanking, consulting firms, big consumer products companies, and here comes this guy, with a shaved head, and he's about 6'3", and he's telling you, what you really need to do is join this consulting firm that's got about 20 people in it out in San Francisco, and I was really compelled, right? And in fact, I had pursued an internship there, and just to I'll share an anecdote about Scott, which I think it tells you a little bit about him. I was dressed for other internship interviews at the time and had a suit and tie on. And when I went to Profit, Scott's like, "Hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. Let's not interview here in this office." And sat down at the cafe out on the sidewalk. And Scott looks at me and he says, "I'm not going to do this interview with you until you take that tie off." Right? Which wasn't offended at all. It was sort of like, yeah, it makes sense. Why would I want to talk to a brand strategy guy, right? Wearing a tie, I get it, right? And so Scott, he recognizes talent. He rewards talent. He's provocative. That's kind of, I think, the way that he accesses people. And he's not afraid to, whether you believe it or not, right? He's not afraid to tell you what he thinks. And that, I think, is, now he's got a big media career that's entertaining, but from a insight and consulting standpoint, boy, was that valuable to clients. So I'm grateful for my time working with him. It was really fun.
No, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. I just want to point out too that from the Chicago Bears to McDonald's, Chicago's home, and Potbelly. Am I right about that? It seems like you're always you did go away, but you come back home.
Yeah, I'm a kid from the Midwest. I grew up in Detroit, or a suburb of Detroit, and made my way here for college. And yeah, I've spent more of my adult life here in Chicago than I have anywhere else. And it's comfortable, right? It's home. My wife is from here too, and it's a fantastic place to raise a family. And you know what? I can get to anywhere from Chicago. It's pretty darn easy. But aside from the winters, we love it here.
Well, thank you for that. We are up to our final question where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. And we're wondering what your priorities are as CFO of Potbelly for the next 12 months. What are those 12-month priorities?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before, we're in the throes of really building and growing this business through franchising. And that's, that takes some effort, and, takes, building out some infrastructure, some team members, and really kind of pivoting the business. And that's a huge focus, right? It's every member of the management team has a role in making that a reality. My role is, right, to obviously kind of help architect and sketch out how that path might look, but then also provide the resources to the team to make it happen. So I will spend a good portion of my time on that, but also capital structure is one of those things that I think is a never-ending task for a CFO. And I mentioned we had no debt heading into the pandemic. We took loans with PPP. I did an equity raise, in early 2022, and now we have a term loan. And so all of these things are always kind of in motion as it relates to what's the right capital structure for this business. I'll be thinking about that. I will be thinking about what we discussed earlier too, which is, what is the right role for some of these analytical tools and perhaps some AI as applied, right, to this business, because again, that's one of the places where I think we can stand out and really outcompete others. So I'm thrilled with where this business is, with what's ahead for us. It's really fun to be in a company this size where you can see the growth and you can activate the growth. There's nothing wrong with being in big companies either. I've seen that, and that's exciting too, to be a part of a global brand or global brands. But this brand has something special, and so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Steve Cirulis, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.